Stop killing your potted perennials. Container versus ground secrets for overwintering and spring blooms. Hello friends, and welcome back to Earthly Delights. If you're here, I know you're someone who treasures the life of your plants, whether that's caring for a row of pots on your sunny balcony, tending a lush backyard garden, or nurturing just a few favorite perennials in your living room window. You're the kind of person who feels joy watching green leaves stretch toward the light, who notices when soil feels too dry, and who takes pride in seeing blooms return year after year. But if you've ever stepped outside in spring only to find a pot of mush where your plant used to be, you also know the heartbreak. The truth is, winter can be cruel to potted perennials, and many gardeners, even experienced ones, lose them not because they don't care, but because the hidden challenges of overwintering catch them off guard. That's why in today's video, we're diving deep into the secrets of keeping your potted perennials alive through the cold months. Together, we'll explore container versus ground overwintering, the mistakes to avoid, and the exact steps that will set you up for a vibrant, blooming spring. So if saving your perennials matters to you, make sure you hit subscribe and tap that bell, because here at Earthly Delights, we turn gardening struggles into stories of success. Part 1, the hidden dangers that kill perennials in winter. Let's begin with the harsh truth. Most perennials that fail in winter don't die because they're weak. They die because their gardeners never saw the dangers coming. Imagine this. You've spent your summer tending those pots on the patio, watering just enough, feeding them carefully, watching blooms unfold with pride. Then winter sweeps in. At first, the pots look fine. The leaves wither, the stems fade, and you think they're just going dormant. But come spring, instead of fresh shoots pushing up, you find a pot of mush, lifeless soil, or roots that crumble like dust. It feels like a betrayal, but really, it's nature playing by rules most people haven't been taught. One of the biggest threats is exposed roots. When a perennial lives in the ground, the earth around it acts like a thick blanket, keeping temperatures steady. But in a pot, those roots are sitting right against thin walls, and every gust of freezing wind slices through the soil. Then comes the freeze-thaw cycle. A sunny day warms the container, then nightfall locks it in ice again. That constant expansion and contraction doesn't just stress the pot, it shreds the delicate tissues of the roots inside. And let's not forget water. Sometimes pots dry out silently in the cold, leaving roots brittle, while other times excess moisture freezes solid and suffocates them. The final mistake? Believing dormancy means no care at all. Roots may look lifeless above ground, but below the surface, they're still breathing, still depending on you for survival. If you've ever felt that sting of failure, know this: you are not alone. Every gardener has faced it, even the seasoned ones. But the good news is, once you understand these hidden dangers, you'll never look at overwintering the same way again. And that's where the real story of protecting your perennials begins. Part 2, why potted perennials struggle more than in-ground plants. Here's the part many gardeners overlook. A perennial in the ground and a perennial in a pot may be the same plant, but they live two very different winters. In the ground, roots are cradled by layers of soil that shift temperature slowly, like a natural thermal blanket. It takes time for the cold to reach deep enough to cause real harm. But in a pot, those same roots are left vulnerable, pressed against thin walls that offer little more than a barrier against the wind. The cold slips in fast, sometimes dropping the temperature inside the soil far below what the plant would ever experience underground. And it's not just the temperature, it's the pot itself. Clay and ceramic containers, while beautiful in summer, often betray us in winter. As moisture seeps into their pores, it freezes, expands, and cracks. By spring, you may not only lose the plant, but also the pot that once held it. Even sturdy materials like concrete or terracotta can break under the stress of sudden weather swings. Smaller containers are the most fragile of all because they hold so little soil that the roots inside have almost no protection when the frost comes. You might think a hardy perennial labeled safe for your zone should be fine, but here's the catch. Once planted in a container, that same plant effectively lives 2 zones colder. A Zone 5 perennial in the ground may thrive, but in a pot it faces conditions closer to Zone 3. That's why so many gardeners shake their heads in disappointment each spring, wondering why their hardy plants never woke up. This is the moment where understanding changes everything. When you know why potted perennials struggle more, you stop blaming yourself and you start planning smarter. And that planning is what turns disappointment into the joy of seeing green shoots return after the snow melts. Part 3, the bright side of keeping perennials in pots through winter. Before you think every container is doomed the moment frost arrives, let me share the brighter side of the story. For many gardeners, especially those who grow on balconies, patios, or small yards, overwintering in pots isn't just a choice, it's the only option. And the truth is, it can work beautifully when done with intention. The greatest advantage is flexibility. Unlike plants locked into the ground, pots can be shifted, clustered, and tucked into safer corners. You can move them close to a south-facing wall where warmth lingers, or even slip them into an unheated garage, shed, or porch when the harshest storms roll in. That mobility is a gift for those of you working with limited space or for older gardeners who want to protect plants without heavy digging. There's also the benefit of preservation. Some perennials don't appreciate being disturbed every fall, their roots sensitive to constant replanting. By leaving them in their pots, you avoid unnecessary stress. For collectors who prize rare or delicate varieties, containers are a lifeline, offering controlled conditions and easy monitoring. And let's not forget convenience. Sometimes your energy, health, or time simply doesn't allow for ground digging every autumn, and pots offer a practical, realistic solution. Of course, this path does demand vigilance. A container left to face the winter bare is like a house without insulation, but with a little care, it transforms into a safe cocoon. And that's the key, recognizing that container overwintering is less about luck and more about strategy. Once you see its strengths and its weaknesses clearly, you'll know exactly how to protect your green companions until spring calls them back to life. Part 4, Secrets to Successfully Overwintering Perennials in Containers. Here's where the real magic begins, turning those fragile pots into safe winter shelters instead of plant graveyards. The first secret is size. Bigger pots aren't just a style choice, they're survival gear. More soil means more insulation, more warmth held in, and less chance that a sudden freeze will reach the roots. If you're debating whether to leave a perennial in a 1-gallon or a 3-gallon pot, always choose the larger. Think of it as giving your plant a heavier coat for the winter. The second secret is material. As charming as clay and ceramic pots look in summer, they're almost guaranteed heartbreak by spring. Freezing and thawing cracks them wide open. Plastic, composite, wood, or even metal offer far better protection. If you absolutely love the look of ceramic, consider repotting into a sturdier container just for the cold months, then slipping it back in when spring arrives. Shelter is the next step. Don't let your pots stand alone in the open wind. Group them together, let them huddle for warmth, and if possible, push them against a wall where they'll be shielded on at least one side. Wrap them in burlap, bubble wrap, or even old blankets to slow the cold from seeping in. Some clever gardeners even place small pots inside larger ones and pack the gap with leaves or mulch, creating a double layer of insulation. And don't forget the soil itself. Moist soil holds heat better than dry, but it should never be soggy. For the first hard frost, water deeply. Then, through the winter, check occasionally. If the soil feels bone dry during a thaw, add just a little water. The final secret is mindset. Dormancy doesn't mean neglect. Your plant may not show life above the soil, but the roots below are still breathing, still depending on you. By giving them shelter, moisture, and protection, you transform a vulnerable pot into a promise of spring. And when those green shoots reappear, you'll know your effort was worth every moment. Part in why overwintering perennials in the ground works like nature intended. When we turn our attention from pots to the ground, everything suddenly feels simpler, more natural, almost as if the earth itself is eager to lend a helping hand. Soil is more than just a place where roots live. It is a living blanket, holding warmth, regulating moisture, and slowing down the violent swings of winter temperatures. Think about it. When a perennial rests in the ground, the freeze comes gradually, creeping down inch by inch, never rushing, never shocking. Compare that to a pot left on the patio, where icy winds and sudden thaws punish the roots day after day. There are two main ways to lean into the ground's protection. The first is to lift your perennial from its pot and plant it directly into your garden bed before frost sets in. This gives the roots time to settle, to anchor, to prepare for sleep in the soil's embrace. The second is a clever compromise, burying the entire pot. By sinking it so only the rim peaks above the surface, you let the earth insulate without disturbing the plant's roots. In both cases, a thick layer of mulch, be it leaves, straw, pine needles, or wood chips, adds an extra quilt, holding in warmth and guarding against harsh winds. I remember the first year I tried burying pots. I doubted it would make much difference. But when spring arrived, those buried plants were not only alive, they were thriving, stronger than any I had left above ground. It was a revelation. Sometimes the old ways, simply trusting soil and mulch, are the most reliable. So if you have the space and don't mind a little digging, ground overwintering offers a peace of mind no pot on its own can match. It's a reminder that sometimes the best way to protect your plants is to return them to the very place they were meant to grow. Part 6, how to master the best practices of ground overwintering. Once you understand why the ground offers such powerful protection, the next step is learning how to use it wisely. Timing is everything. If you decide to transplant your perennials from pots into the soil, don't wait until the frost is already biting at your heels. Give yourself 4 to 6 weeks before the first hard freeze, enough time for the roots to adjust, to knit themselves gently into their new home. If you choose to bury the pot instead, the same rule applies. Early preparation means smoother survival. Mulch becomes your greatest ally in this process. Spread it generously, 3 to 6 inches thick, over and around the base of your plants. Dry leaves, shredded straw, pine needles, or wood chips all work like a cozy quilt. Not only does mulch help regulate soil temperature, but it also shields roots from moisture extremes. Imagine your perennials tucked into bed with layers of soft blankets, sleeping soundly until spring nudges them awake. But we can't forget the hidden risks. Ground overwintering isn't without its pitfalls. Poor drainage is one of the deadliest mistakes. If your soil holds water, freezing turns it into a suffocating block of ice, smothering the roots you worked so hard to protect. That's why choosing the right spot matters. Avoid low-lying, soggy ground where meltwater pools. Another danger comes from uninvited guests, rodents and voles that see your buried pots as a winter buffet. Surrounding the area with wire mesh or hardware cloth can spare you from that heartbreak. I'll never forget uncovering a row of buried pots one spring and finding them fresher, fuller, and stronger than ever. It was a moment of clarity. When you give your plants the insulation they deserve and the conditions they need, nature does the rest. That's the beauty of mastering ground overwintering. It's less about constant work and more about creating the right setup than letting the earth carry your plants through the cold. Part 7, choosing the overwintering method that fits you best. Now that we've explored both sides, the strengths of containers and the natural protection of the ground, it's time to face the most important question. Which method is right for you? The answer isn't the same for every gardener because each of us tends a different space, lives in a different climate, and balances a different rhythm of life. If you garden in the colder zones where winters drag long and harsh, keeping perennials in exposed pots is often a gamble. In these regions, the ground with its steady insulation is your safest bet. But if you're in a milder zone where frosts are gentler and winters shorter, you may find that pots, when grouped, wrapped, and sheltered, can carry your plants through just fine. Space is another factor. Some of you are balcony gardeners, where the only option is a cluster of pots against a wall. Others are blessed with a backyard or even a community plot, where sinking a pot or transplanting into soil is easy. Your containers matter too. Heavy ceramics rarely survive the freeze-thaw cycle, while thick plastic or wooden planters can endure if given a little extra care. And then there's lifestyle. If you're caring for dozens of pots, hauling each one inside may be impossible, and clustering them outdoors becomes a smarter path. But if you're tending only a handful of favorites, perhaps that extra effort to carry them into a shed or basement is worth it. The beauty of overwintering is that it's never one size fits all. It's about matching the method to your climate, your space, your pots, and your time. When you choose the method that truly fits you, overwintering shifts from being a stressful gamble to a confident strategy, one that lets you look forward to spring with certainty rather than doubt. Part 8. Common Myths Gardeners believe about winter survival. Before we move deeper into action steps, we need to pause and clear away some stubborn myths that mislead even the most passionate gardeners. The first myth whispers that if a perennial is labeled hardy for your zone, it will survive just fine in a pot. Sadly, that's not the case. A plant that thrives in the soil of Zone 5 may face conditions closer to Zone 3 when grown in a container, because the roots no longer have the Earth's insulation. The label can be deceiving, and many gardeners discover too late that their hardy perennial wasn't prepared for the harsher reality of container life. Another myth is that dormancy equals neglect. When leaves vanish and stems turn brittle, it's tempting to believe nothing is happening below the surface. But roots are still alive, quietly breathing, still depending on a balance of moisture and temperature. Forget them entirely through the long months, and by spring there is nothing left to wake up. Then there's the myth that snow is the enemy. We imagine snow smothering our plants, but in truth, a soft, steady blanket of snow can act as one of the best insulators. It shields the soil from sharp winds and sudden temperature swings. It's not snow that kills, it's ice crusts, standing water, or sudden thaws that freeze and suffocate roots. By unlearning these myths, you begin to see winter gardening in a new light. You no longer feel tricked by a plant tag or lulled into false security by dormancy. You begin to recognize snow not as a threat, but as a quiet helper. And once these illusions are stripped away, you can step into winter with a clearer vision, ready to use strategies that truly honor the hidden life inside your perennials. Part 9. Clever hacks and creative tricks to keep perennials safe. Now that we've cleared up the myths, let's lean into the creativity that makes gardening so rewarding. Protecting your perennials through winter doesn't always require expensive solutions. Sometimes it's the humble tricks and household items that make the biggest difference. One of the simplest hacks is clustering your pots tightly together. When grouped, the plants on the outer edge act as a shield, protecting those in the center and creating a small pocket of warmer air. It's like a community of plants standing shoulder to shoulder, braving the cold together. Snow itself can be a friend if used wisely. A steady layer of snow acts like a natural blanket, holding in warmth, but if it hardens into ice, it needs to be broken up so air can still reach the soil. Raised beds can also double as winter shelters. By sinking your pots into the soil of a raised bed, you create instant insulation without having to dig up half the garden. Come spring, simply lift them back out. For evergreens, sprays designed to reduce water loss, called anti-desiccants, can keep them from drying out in harsh winter winds. But if you don't have those products, don't worry. Old blankets, flattened cardboard boxes, or even leftover straw bales from autumn decorations can serve just as well. I've even seen gardeners build makeshift windbreaks using scraps of wood or old pallets, turning a vulnerable row of pots into a snug, sheltered alcove. The beauty of these hacks is that they remind us gardening isn't about perfection, it's about resourcefulness. By thinking a little differently, by reusing what you already have, you not only protect your plants, but also deepen your connection with them. Each small act of care becomes a promise, a way of saying, "I'll see you in spring." Part 10. Guiding your perennials through the spring awakening. At last, winter loosens its grip and the first hints of spring creep into the air. But this is not the time to rush. Your perennials, after months of quiet endurance, are fragile as they stir awake. One of the most important steps is uncovering them gradually. If you peel away every layer of mulch or insulation the moment the sun shines, you risk exposing tender roots to sudden chills when night temperatures plunge again. Instead, remove protection slowly, giving your plants time to adjust, like gently opening the curtains after a long sleep. Water, too, must return with care. Roots that have just survived the cold aren't ready for a flood of attention. Begin with light watering, enough to remind them that growth is coming, but hold back from heavy feeding. Fertilizers too early can overwhelm rather than strengthen. Wait until you see steady new growth, then feed sparingly, letting the plant build its strength naturally. And even though the calendar says spring, don't underestimate late frosts. They sneak in when least expected, capable of undoing months of careful preparation. Keep frost cloths, old sheets, or even lightweight blankets close at hand. A quick cover on a cold night may be all it takes to safeguard fresh shoots. This stage is also your chance to learn. Watch which plants bounce back with vigor and which ones falter. Keep a simple journal of your methods and results. Over time, these notes become your personal gardening map, guiding you through each winter with more wisdom. When you handle the spring transition with patience and observation, you don't just save your perennials. You give them the foundation to flourish stronger than ever before. Turning winter lessons into a blooming spring. So now you've walked with me through the hidden dangers, the struggles of pots, the power of soil, and the clever hacks that can mean the difference between a pot of mush and a burst of color when spring arrives. What I hope you carry with you is the confidence that winter doesn't have to be a season of loss. With the right method, whether it's protecting your containers with care or trusting the earth with ground overwintering, you can give your perennials the gift of survival and yourself the joy of renewal when the snow melts away. Remember, gardening is never about perfection. It's about learning, adjusting, and connecting more deeply with the life you nurture. Every pot you save this winter becomes a story you'll celebrate in spring. And even if you've lost plants before, those lessons now guide you toward better choices and stronger results. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever lost a favorite perennial to winter, or maybe discovered your own trick to help them survive? Share your story in the comments so we can all learn together. And if today's video has given you clarity, don't forget to subscribe to Earthly Delights and tap the bell icon. That way, you'll never miss a tip that could save your plants and brighten your garden. Together, we'll turn every challenge into a chance for growth and every winter into a promise of spring.